everyone. This is Sonja Robinson hosting the S.U.N Talk Radio Show, Sustainable Urban Network, Saturdays at 3 p.m. on GODRadio1.com for us to scale up our neighborhoods.
Tune in to S.U.N Sustainable Urban Network Talk Radio Show on GODRadio1.com. Get up, get out, and get green. We can't let Earth pass us by. We got to scale up our neighborhood, y'all.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another day in S.U.N Sustainable Urban Network. You could be anywhere, but you chose to tune in, and we want to say thank you. And happy S.U.N Saturday. So today's topic is about power to the people, like literally power to the people. We are going to be talking about public power and how are we going to bring public power here in San Diego. But as all of our shows, before we dive into this great topic, what a fantastic expert level experience panel. I'm going to share some information on what's happening, but I will going to be very, very brief. And so before we get started, as we do on most of our shows, I want to go ahead and start our show off. Before we get into our reflection, this panel wanted to honor those that have been unfortunately mistreated and have even lost their lives to police brutality. And so for our movement for racial justice. So we're going to take 9 seconds moment of silence, and I will name off these names. Jacob Blake, Daniel Prudes, Eric Gardner, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Tyrone West, Sandra Bland, Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown. Great. So now, as we do on all of our shows, I am also going to give a reflection. And this reflection is intended to really kind of set that pace on our topic for today, which is, again, power to the people. And so our reflection is a quote by our Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And it reads as such: "I'm not interested in power of power's sake, but I'm interested in power that is moral, that is right, and that is good." So in addition to our reflection, we have to do our S.U.N enlightenments. And our S.U.N enlightenments are inspired by our modern thought teacher, Don Miguel Ruiz. And our S.U.N enlightenments read as such: 1, be responsible with your resources. 2, take the state of our environment and our racial and social justice seriously. 3, don't wait for others, do your part. And 4, when you do, give your best loving effort. And I can say that this panel definitely embodies our S.U.N enlightenments, because they don't wait for others. They are acting and moving in a very loving and passionate way. Next, what we're going to be talking about today is, man, there's been a lot happening, but one of the things I wanted to bring up is, of course, we know that weather conditions, are indicating that there's just going to be a risk of wildfires, not just over our state, but even here in San Diego. So we have to do our part. We have to make sure our climate action plan is resilient enough to protect us and protect the vulnerables. So that is something we want to keep in mind. Also, I want to share that there's a CDP RFP, request for proposal as a grant. And what it is an inside of action of implementing equitable, sustainable infrastructure. So anyone that's interested, check it out. It is available online, and that is with the CDP. Also, another announcement is just on Friday, there was a retirement party at City Hall. Can you imagine that? And what was the retirement party about? Their franchise agreement. So a lot of people, our public constituents of this great city, decided to put a rest to the franchise agreement that's no longer serving our needs. And that occurred on yesterday. And also earlier today was our Environmental Leadership Summit. And yours truly was honored to give the keynote speak on that. So fill you in a little bit later, maybe next week. Also, want to make mention that our Environmental and Climate Justice Committee is Tuesday, October 6th. So the NAACP San Diego branch and the NAACP North San Diego County branch, we are meeting Tuesday, October 6th at 7 p.m. It's the first Tuesday. And our Sunshine Award, who is shining, did y'all see Shariah's closet? Miss Shameen and her board, Erica. So we want to give our local Sunshine Award to Shariah's Closet as they're giving really nice quality, gentle use clothes to those who need it without question, without comment, without judgment. And we want to give them out that shine. Fossil fuel. So the fossil shade goes to those who are objecting our efforts. And so this week's fossil shade, if you heard anything about it from the White House. So the White House ordered the EPA to postpone their speaker series on racism, which was scheduled on September 15th. They literally issued out a government-wide order for agencies to stop certain what they call un-American race-related training. And so these race diversity training and racism and awareness is necessary so we can actually move forward. So they definitely get the fossil shade. In addition to that, there was an attempt to eliminate the Environmental Advisory Board for sustainable energy, community forests, and our wetlands. So here in San Diego, our CAP, there is an attempt to try to eliminate these other advisory boards, and we want to say no. We want to say no on a S500 is a agenda item on our city council, and we want to make sure that we get a full public engagement process on our advisory boards, as our city has already addressed that climate emergency is in fact here in the city of San Diego. Now onto our panel. Fight the power, y'all. So before I introduce this great new panel of speakers, we're going to have our theme song. And today's topic, as I mentioned before, is public power. And so right after that, I will introduce our panel. That's right. We got the power. So yes, our voice here in San Diego, our voice anywhere, understand that your voice is power. And so collectively, we can really make the change that we need. So on our panel today, we have Mr. Bill Powers. He is a local expert as an engineer, a professional engineer, and he fights our battles from California Public Utilities Commission here locally and honestly all over the country. We also have Dr. Darwin Fishman. He is a professor up at San Diego State University. He teaches sociology classes, as well as he's one of the founders of our Racial Justice Coalition, and he's part of many different boards as well. We have Dr. Cody Petterson. He is the president of our San Diego County Environmental Dems for Action. It's a long name. And he also is very active in our community as well as in our political policy, bringing policy that matters to restore justice in our communities. We also have Mr. Rob Howard. He has spent over 2 decades in the field of energy, and he knows, and he's on the path of restoring and making sure justice is brought to our communities as is related to our energy. And he is our next mayor for the city of Oceanside. He has a current campaign underway now. We have also Miss Wanda Rogers. She is an entrepreneur. She is a woman, Black-owned business. She works in the space of construction, as well as she does apprenticeships, and she's also very active in our community and definitely want to hear her voice as a business owner. We also have Mr. Jerry Wanetick. He is a retired director of IT, also retired from a research associate from Scripps Institution Oceanography, and very active in our community and pushing things forward as well. And we have Mr. Danny Vita. He is very known throughout our city and our communities as far as being a community advocate. And he's also a campaign manager representing and supporting Sarah Davis as our next assembly member. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
Yes. So as we're talking about public power, I mean, we've had some really great movement as we're really forming this effort to make sure that our city is able to realize our true benefits and what's best. What I would like to ask, and I want to start this question out with Bill Powers, is can you explain to us what is a public utilities?
A public utility is a utility that's owned by a city government or a nonprofit entity. And back when all of this began in the late 19th century, electricity was commercialized and cities were looking about adding electricity service lights to their community. Most of these entities were public. This is part of city government, water, power. Some cities like Los Angeles Department of Water and Power were formed because the private companies that were doing it badly. They were paying too much money. It sounds as though that not a lot has changed over 120 or 130 years. Started out with mostly public. In the early part of the 20th century, the privatization. There were some private utilities that began. These are private companies, for-profit companies. They gained a lot more power in the 20s and 30s, began to consolidate what had been public utilities into private shareholder profit-based utilities. But there's always been a fairly large public component that's still out there. They're either managed by cities as city departments like LADWP, like Pasadena, Burbank, or they're managed in another fashion with their own separate boards. So what we have in California now is really a hybrid. About 25% of the power is provided by public electric utilities. The rest is provided by investor-owned utilities. That's the brief history of public power.
Thank you for sharing that, Bill. So not just what's public utilities, but I want to know more about like how did we get here and some of that backstory. Cody, can you kind of share with us some of the backstory of what's driving the need for public utilities here in San Diego?
Yeah, so the immediate history of the current franchise, we're in a 50-year franchise agreement that was signed in 1970. That with SDG&E, there's a whole story about how that came about. Actually, there was consideration at that time too of forming a public utility, but at the time interest rates were so high that the financial folks thought that we wouldn't be able to make the interest payments on acquiring SDG&E's in the ground assets. So at the time, we signed a 50-year agreement with them. There was a lot of turbulence in the beginning. In 72, there was an attempt to get out of it because SDG&E immediately turned around and went to the California Public Utilities Commission, which is what regulates at the state level, what regulates private utilities, and turned around. We had a 3% franchise fee that SDG&E by contract would pay to us. Unfortunately, they turned around that very first year and said, no, you know what? We're going to charge that to ratepayers. And that is, in fact, what we're stuck with now is that we actually pay the franchise fee that SDG&E pays to us as citizens, to the city. It actually takes from us as ratepayers. So we've been stuck for 50 years with this franchise agreement that everyone really agreed initially we did not get a good deal for various reasons. And it is up actually January 17th of 2021, next year.
Right.
So there's a lot of conversation right now about what should come next.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing this. So Darwin, I want to ask you is as we're driving towards public utilities, rather staying the same, can you share some motivating factors of why this initiative is so important?
Yeah, thank you. And it's for my neck of the woods for public policy, it makes a lot of sense. Especially in terms of for public control, when you're looking at things like being able to select energy sources. And if you're trying to do things like you have an energy plan and as well as pollution plan for things like emissions, it also makes sense for ratepayers if you lower the rates. And I think the thing I would say is really important is it's also really foundational for good government in the sense that your elected officials should try to get the best deal for you. And as we're looking at things like 101 Ash Street, there's not a lot of confidence we're going to have in government in the deals that they make for us. So this gives them a really good opportunity to actually do the right job, what they're elected for, and really, again, represent the people that put them in office. So it really should be first and foremost about good government and not just like slamming this through and cutting a check.
I love that. So on that, power to the people, Darwin. I agree with you on that. So now I want to kind of ask, we know that, SDG&E has the highest rates in the state of California and some of the top in the country. But as far as reliability, they don't rank the top, right? So even though we're paying the most and they have the highest rates, they don't have the highest reliability service. So Jerry, can you kind of share why you think public utilities power would deliver more of a reliable electric service here for us locally?
Sure. So the strength of a public power system would be that rather than focusing on profits for shareholders, the money that is charged to the ratepayers will go directly to maintaining the infrastructure of that system and making sure that it's the long-term planning is in place to avoid these rolling blackouts that the public utilities have been experiencing, like during this last heat wave. The public utilities here in California didn't experience those because they're not tied into the independent operators grid, and so aren't beholden to them. And so they were able to focus more on reliability and uptime than the investor-owned utilities.
Great, thank you for sharing that. So now, Rob, you have an extensive experience in this industry as well. But I want to know, could you kind of share and how we can help mitigate some of that fear, as we also want, and we are in a line with our labor brothers and sisters, right? Our labor unions. Can you kind of speak on your thoughts in that realm as we move towards a public utilities?
Well, if the effort is really moving towards what we call, and because there's different levels of who actually is going to be responsible in running that, whether it is the city or an independent nonprofit, the pieces really, the concerns I know in the labor community and is more about, we've worked 100 years of contract negotiations, working and bargaining with this particular utility, and we have decent wages, we have benefits, we have retirement, defined benefit pension. And so you'll get an initial pushback because it's like, wait a minute, how do we know that we won't be the ones, because we're just working rank and file people. We'll be the ones left holding the bag of, okay, well, you're going to work for this much. And so because the group has been actively talking about this, and that's the key. I want to commend you for being part of a group that brings the different parts together, because it has huge benefit. But a lot of it is about, what is it going to look like on the other side? Plus, there's another concern about, if it were, let's say it was the city. Well, the city hasn't always been the best employer. So you have that concern as well. And oftentimes, if I know the employer I'm dealing with, I understand those things, I have a safer environment to work from, because again, it's about ensuring that our families who are working every day have the benefits, have their pensions, because that's what you work for. You want to be able to retire with dignity.
Right. Totally. I totally get it. So now I also want to hear from Wanda, as a business owner, can you kind of share your thoughts on why having lower rates would make a difference to you as a Black woman business owner?
Thank you, LaSonja, for the opportunity. I appreciate you, Sonja. For me, as you mentioned, a small minority-owned woman business, being a serial entrepreneur, I think about the jobs that are created for the construction arena, how I can assist others with jobs. But right now we start to run into issues with the cost of utilities being so high. And so for me, I'd rather take that money and invest it in one of my programs that I have going on, like my pre-apprenticeship program. Those individuals that come through the program, they're going to need assistance in another type of way, that the extra money that I pay to the utilities for SDG&E, it would assist them maybe with transportation. It might assist them with being able to, show up on time. However we look at it, to reduce the cost, it would help me. I recently received my electrical bill to think about it today, and it was $200 and some. And I was like, whoa. But because I had to run the air for 3 weeks due to the heat wave we had here, I could see, was there a discount? It was minimal. And I was like, okay, wait a minute. I need another option. So public power is a different option. So
I love that. And so, I mean, you have a nice, business office as well. It's not like one of those skyscrapers or it's not, overly large, but it is, it's nice, but the square footage doesn't look like it would, reflect, the bill, the over $200 bill that you just quoted, Danny, I would love to also hear from you on, by implementing public power, can you share with us how you think this can benefit working families, the Brown communities, as well as the Black communities as well?
Absolutely, and I think it's really important that we see the effects on our community, especially the underrepresented communities. We have seen so long that the political will has just not been there. Recently we've seen City Council, for example, my member of the council in San Diego, his name is Chris Ward. He actually voted to keep in place this franchise, which the community opposes. And so we see that the political will is not there, and it's really affecting our underrepresented communities. We see with COVID, the Latino community has been affected at a higher rate than everyone else. And having to see that we're using more utilities every day and we're paying more and more, it just doesn't make sense to us. And that's why you see the community power here with everyone here. It's important that we make sure that we start calling our city council members. So, I do want to take this time to make sure that we're calling our city council members to demand the action, to demand transparency, and to demand public power.
Absolutely. Yes. Power to the people. So now, that's going to be the thing. We're just going to keep rolling with that because that's exactly what we're doing. So now that we've heard a lot about like what it is and from different people's perspective from a community, I would like to either, Bill, Jerry, whoever, to kind of chime in on. There's many different types, and Bill, you kind of touched on this already on how we can actually form it. What do we think could be the best pathway for San Diego to form a public power?
Well, I can start on that, and it's important to remember that we do have a public utility in San Diego, which is water and wastewater. They do get flack, but I must say that a lot of that flack has to do with a billing issue that came up a couple of years ago and became a cause célèbre. But that billing issue actually showed the power of being under local control. City Council acted, there was an audit, they took care of it, got done at the local level. So I just want to put a plug in for the local public utility because it got way too much flack over that. But there are other structures, for example, Sacramento Municipal Utility District. It's completely separate from any city within their district. They have an elected board, 7 members, completely autonomous. We have something similar in San Diego with the San Diego Unified School District, 5 elected.
Okay, look like
board member, separate budget, separate everything, and it does puts a complete firewall between that activity and city government. So if you just have a problem with the city based on your experience with them, or you're worried that the utility might tap into the city's general fund or something like that, there are models like SMUD or like San Diego Unified that make it a completely separate, complete firewall.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. Now, another question I have has to do with, I'm sorry, Jerry or anyone else wanted to chime in on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think having an elected board that the people in the city have direct access to, rather than the board of directors of a company like SDG&E,
Good point.
only answer to their shareholders, I think is a critical component of a public power system.
How about you, Cody? Did you have any thoughts on how the best way for us to form it here in San Diego?
Yeah, we've had a lot of discussions with this. I mean, with Public Power San Diego, but also just in general, this is a topic that when municipalities are thinking about doing this sort of thing, how to structure it. I think, you know, part of the problem is San Diego has had 50 years of Republicans, not to be partisan about it, but that have really starved city government. And so when you have austerity imposed on a government agency for that long, they did this with a great example is NYCHA, New York City Housing Authority, which had wonderful, really model public housing for many, many decades. And then you had consecutive Republican administrations at the federal level, because it relied a lot on federal funding, and at the state level that starved it. And then they turned around and then they said, look, it doesn't work, but they'd already starved it. So in a way, the city of San Diego has been the victim of that. And while it's not as, you know, I get water, you know, that still works. Stormwater works. That's issues, but it's not a catastrophe. But at the same time, a lot of people have some warranted concerns about the city's ability, as starved as it has been over the last decades, to perform this work, which is great, which is fine. You know, there are mechanisms like a district structure like SMUD uses, or San Diego School District, that allow us to actually have it firewalled off, where it can actually implement the policy and it can do what citizens want with the money and still be very responsive to its constituency. And so we're eager for that. If that ends up being what citizens prefer, then that's what we'll move forward with.
So I really appreciate what you said, and I love the way you described starving, right? Because even for this franchise agreement, utility franchise agreement, it's been 50 years, so they starved and been a lack of an opportunity for our city government and our city elected officials to have experience with this. So, you know, Danny and Darwin also spoke on this, right? As far as our elected officials to actually be the ones to do what's best for us. Well, how can they get this experience? So now I kind of like what you're saying. And now, unfortunately, with 50 years, 25 years is a starved experience, right? So then your constituents doesn't have the faith in you, and that shouldn't be the case, right? So you make a great point. Did anyone else want to chime in on this? You guys are acting so formal. You know, we all know each other. So another question I have, as we're looking at our investor-owned utilities, and they will try to express that rarity of what a public power is, right? And even use whatever their scare tactic is around that. However, many Americans in our country are being served by a public utility. Literally, you know, when I did my research, I found that 1 out of 7 is being, you know, served from a public utility. So it's not as rare as they will make it seem. Can you let us know how popular that public utility is, even in the state of California? Bill, you mentioned a few of them. Cody or anyone else want to chime in on how many other like public ran utilities we have here? Or Darwin, talk about SMUD?
Well, I'll throw out a number.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I'll throw out a number, which is there are about 40 public electric utilities in California. And as you mentioned earlier, Sonja, their primary emphasis is reliability, because the $1 million a day that San Diego residents pay to San Diego Gas and Electric in profit.
Uh-oh, Bill.
$1 a day in profit is lower rates, and it gets rolled into what the community wants to do with it.
Right.
In fact,
Yeah.
Rob was talking about the same thing, is that money gets community decides and it goes to community priorities.
Right.
Okay.
Sonja, yeah, and also those funds can, rather than going to that $1 million a day net profit to SDG&E shareholders.
One second, Jerry. That was 1 million net, not
net.
Okay, good point. Go ahead.
Capital N. Yeah, 1 million net per day to the shareholders of SDG&E. That could come back to the city a city utility that could then reinvest in the community. And reinvestment could be in sustainable, renewable energy sources, like, for instance, funding or subsidizing rooftop solar in communities of need. Communities that can't afford those kinds of capital expenses could be subsidized. And what you have then is this cascading effect of the rooftop solar throughout the city, taking the load off of the grid, and thus obviating the need to build peaker power plants or additional fossil fuel power plants to make up the differential. And you have this, so everybody in the region benefits because you reduce pollution at that point. So there's this cascading effect that having a community-owned power system has on the environment as well as on the economic quality of life.
You bring up an excellent point, and I appreciate you sharing that, Jerry. And Darwin, I'd like to ask you too, can you kind of elaborate a little bit more on what Jerry shared on what ways would you say that public power can help uplift our local economy here in San Diego?
Sure. But let me also just talk about the process too, the challenge for it, because it's not equally weighted. So like, if public power is the best option, if you just step back and think about it, there's not a natural constituency in that sense they're advocating for it. SDG&E is going to advocate for themselves, $1 million profit. They're going to make it sound like this the best deal in the world you're going to have. Unions have their jobs, politicians have theirs. So in that sense, we step back and we think about it, it's really actually at a certain level very hard to get public power, even if it is the best option, in the sense that if you, for example, do a thing of a simple exercise like a scorecard, and you say rate SDG&E on things like their rates, do they take care of things like trees, forest fires, like what is their record, what is their community record, they wouldn't do very well on a scorecard. But it's like, who's responsible for that oversight? In that sense, if you go through that process, then you're right. I think you do get to the point where public power is the benefit for the community. In that sense, the $1 million profit part, in that sense, those were funds that would be going to our community. We would be, in that sense, we would benefit from it and would be better for us. But again, you have to figure that out in terms of the sense of that's not something that's going to be naturally advocated for. And that makes it a real challenge to try to go through this. So no, I think it's a really good point and the exact right questions to ask.
So Sonja,
point. Yes, Wanda, I would love to hear from you too.
I was thinking it would benefit in the way of more jobs. It would benefit in another way, that once we can look at the public power, then, another issue we're running into here in San Diego is transportation. It can open up another area for us to talk about transportation. It can open up for community engagement. We need more residents, more constituents to understand what we're talking about here and get involved. Solar panels, the grid, all of these different things, these acronyms and terms that the layman person wouldn't understand. So once we can start educating and moving them into this way and building capacity, it just really brings another level to public power.
I love it, Wanda. Yes, ma'am, you delivered. And Rob, would you also like to chime in? And then I want to hear from you too, Danny, on how do you think, public power could help uplift our local economy here, right? And uplift San Diegans.
Right, and I agree with Darwin. Every stakeholder has a position, but where I try to look at it is, at the end of the day, here are some of the things we have this big conversation about crime and policing. Well, you know what? If we had basics in the community where people had options, you actually save even more money because you need less policing. As an example of a way to do training. Not every home, particularly the older homes, are going to be able to do the rooftop solar with the battery storage and everything like that. But what we can do with every home is, particularly the older ones, is weatherization. making that home more
That's a good
efficient.
point.
And in order to do that weatherization, you're going to need someone who is trained in that process. Now,
Absolutely.
imagine you take a community that has been basically resources poor. But now I'm putting in a training center in there where I can start teaching basic electronics and electricity. I can start teaching basic tools and how to do basic construction. And as a part of that training, they're weatherizing homes. Not only did I give a person a job, I also now lowered someone's utility bill. So now not only did I lower it, but now if I have a public power position, I have an even lower cost. So it's beginning to put the pieces together and lay it on top of each other, because I do not think the individual stakeholders have to be left out in the cold. There is a way to do this, and it's tough, but we have to stay at the table and agree what's better for the community. Now let's figure out how to make it work.
I love it. And you really deliver it. And I love that you said not to, have others and people in our community left out in the cold. And to your point, though, you're right that everyone may not be able to afford the solar, but I believe also that if done right, even with from a climate equity fund, that those funds can go to provide rooftop solar to those that may not be able to afford it on their own, right? So because we want everyone to be part of our environmental justice movement,
That's right.
not just some, right? Because
That's
at the end of the day, Blacks and Browns, unfortunately, have contributed the least to the state of our environment and our climate, but most of the burden is on our shoulders. So it's time to shift that through public power. Danny, would you like to also share on how you think that public power can help uplift our communities?
Well, I think what we're doing right now is really important. We're trying to put the education behind what public power is, and not only does it affect healthcare, but it affects our underrepresented communities, and it will benefit our economy. It will benefit healthcare. It will benefit our environment. If we do transition to public power, we have seen that throughout this panel, we've seen all the benefits, and we'll continue to connect them. And again, we have existing power structures that use public power, and it showed us that it is beneficial to their communities. But again, I go back to that political will. Nothing's going to be benefited to the community if there's not political will. It's not only Republicans, but it's also Democrats. We're looking at Democratic majority on our city council here in San Diego, and we still don't have the type of power that we need to get this system in place. That's why I work for Sarah Davis, because she supports public power. And when we advocate for candidates that are going to continue to advocate for us, I think that's what we need to do. We need to vote for people that are going to not only put our priorities first, but protect our pockets, protect our environment, and protect our children for the future.
Yes, I really, really appreciate that. So when I think of public power personally, I think about it from a perspective of that is publicly owned and ran, right? So then that means, as we're all saying, that we have a say in exactly how it's best going to serve us, right? So it's publicly, so our public power to the people, our voices, our brilliant thoughts, and from a design perspective to throughout the implementation. When I think of public power, I also think of lower rates and how easy is it to get lower rates than here under SDG&E, right? And then when I think of public power, I think of opportunities as well as high reliability. And so can, Bill, Darwin, or whomever on a panel can share some thoughts on how is public power different? I mean, we kind of show it, but can you give us more details of how it's different than what we currently have, than our current state? Public power is our future state. How is that so much different than what we currently have?
If I can say briefly, I mean, I think to not get too bogged down in details, but we have to remember that investor-owned utilities, they are a profit maximizing organization. It needs to provide shareholders with return on equity or return on capital.
Can you repeat that, Cody? Can you repeat that? Because I think our viewers need to hear that again.
the goal of a private corporation is to return value to shareholders. That's it, zero. I mean, Berkshire Hathaway has come out directly and said it, and if they get the contract, that's what they're going to do. Sempra does the same thing. So when we talk about a lot of things, both rates and reliability and all of that, these people are not driven by, many of them are not like from energy. I mean, they're finance executives. You know, these people are driven to derive profit, and that's the bottom line is the bottom line. So when you can attribute a lot of these differences because there are profound differences. You can go on the American Public Power Association's website. They have a lot of documentation on the benefits in aggregate of publicly provided power. They're substantial, but in large part it's because these corporations, and we saw it with SDG&E in 2007 fires. We've seen it with their fraud that they were convicted of in the early 2000s. We've seen it with in catastrophic ways with PG&E throughout the state with its fires. Their goal is to generate profits, and when you shift from that modality to a modality in which your goal is to actually provide power to residents at the lowest possible rates with the most revenue for the associated municipal body. And if the values of your constituents are to have it be sustainable, then it will be sustainable. Then you'll prioritize sustainability. You'll prioritize a transition away from gas and court electricity. You'll prioritize a transition away from natural gas generation to solar. You'll work on net metering to make sure that it's advantageous to do solar. You'll work with the CPUC to get exit fees for community choice energy that are advantageous. I mean, when that's your bottom line, the health of your community, the sustainability, you're hitting your climate climate plan goals, reducing rates, all of these things, that's what it's going to prioritize. And so that's the major benefit of having a public power authority is actually to prioritize what your public wants.
Go, Cody. You did an excellent job in showing that difference, making it loud and clear. And with that point too, on average, our public utilities, our customers that have public utilities pay at least 11% less than our investor-owned utilities, right? And so how does that, really pertain to households? So we're looking at just everyday people, as we're talking about just going to work, making a living, it's roughly around $180, $175, $180 a year, which is roughly around $15 a month. So it's $15 a month. It's not that significant, but yet still, it still pays for something, right? That's less than where you're paying, as you mentioned, Cody, lining other stakeholders that really don't care about your own, day-to-day expenses as well as your community. So I want to kind of, go ahead.
Putting that into perspective, San Diego, SDG&E customers, the citizens of San Diego pay twice the rates that they pay in Sacramento for the same service. Actually, less reliable service.
Good point. And Darwin, you're familiar with SMUD as well, aren't you?
Yes. Coming from Northern California, I wasn't in Sacramento, but I was in Davis, so I always knew about it. But what I find really fascinating, because you listen to our discussion, you think it's just a slam dunk. I mean, what politician would vote against public power? But I mean, that's the real challenge, is that we can make a really compelling argument, but at the end of the day, I mean, we've got a mayor running around that's making a deal with whoever, and we don't know whether or not the city council is going to go along with it. And I think it's really critical for us to appreciate that, in that how much in that sense we've got work to do to get public power, and that making those best decisions in that sense, fortunately, we just can't rely on the city council and mayor to do that. And for that matter, they might have other interests in that sense in serving us. Who knows, they might be cutting a deal with someone that already paid them or guaranteed them a job when they're out of office. So it's really important to keep that in mind, because I don't want us in that sense to think that just because we made this really compelling case that's going to be we're going to end up with public power. It's always an uphill struggle, even if it's the best policy option for the community.
Great point. And so now that you said that, Cody, I'm going to ask you if you can kind of give us a quick update on some of these details, or with a little bit more details of why Darwin is saying that potentially that our mayor might be just running around already having a deal, and while we don't know about what's happening with the franchise agreement.
Yeah. And I think also, the other thing to think about too is, like, as Darwin said, like, oh, well, I don't get why this isn't happening. Well, so let me just explain very briefly why it's not just that the franchise agreement is up in January that makes it beneficial to do it now. It's because we have historically low interest rates. The Federal Reserve has been goosing, holding down, doing quantitative easing, and
You're
also
trying to be so diplomatic. Just say it, Cody. You ain't got to be diplomatic.
well, look, basically what's happening is the haves are making sure that asset prices are kept up while the rest of the economy is collapsing, which means interest rates are extraordinarily low, because that's what they want, is capital at very low rates. We can get capital very low, which means we can take that in a bond and we can actually buy SDG&E's assets in the ground, because that's what we would have to do. We would have to spend about $2 billion to buy their gas and electric assets in the ground for transmission and distribution. We would have to do another $800 million or $1 billion to buy their gas assets in the ground. We'd have to sever it from the neighboring cities. Costs about $4.5 billion. So you actually need interest rates to be very low in order to do that, because you need cheap capital, so when you're paying you're paying every month, you still have something left over. And in fact, with interest rates as low as they are, we would stand to be able to have a lot of that $1 million a day to reduce rates, to increase government revenue. So I think we really, now is a key time. Interest rates are low, where the franchise is ending right now, and really we've never had an opportunity like this.
Good point. So who wants to share where the state is, why we don't know what the steps are for the current negotiation for the franchise agreement? Who wants to chime in on that?
I might volunteer Cody for that, because
I was trying to get him to tell us.
We have been searching high and low for any information about what the mayor's office is doing, because that whole bid package has gone behind the curtain. I mean, it's in deep state.
As Bill pointed out,
that it's been out there, but nobody's seen it.
What'd you say, Jerry?
I said, rumor has it that the bid has been sent out, but nobody's seen it.
And this is a public government entity. This is all supposed to be public. You don't send out massive bid packages under the cover of darkness.
And if I can add to that, and that's why it needs to be transparent. We're not seeing what is being done in these backroom deals, and so we are looking for a benefit to the deal, to be able to transition at a later date. And that's what I think Cody was touching upon, is that we're looking to contract a good enough deal that it benefits the city.
And not just be so gullible, right? So I mean, just taking it for advantage, that you think that we're just going to be gullible and just go along with whatever you say is right, versus what we know when we do our own research and what we know is available. So,
and if I could say an answer to the question about the timeline, I'll give you a hypothetical timeline that we were under the understanding that was going to happen 2 weeks ago, but it's unclear what's actually happening. Our understanding was that the mayor 2 weeks ago was going to send the agreement he put together using Golub's recommendations, and then also ostensibly taking some things from what council discussion was on the dais at the council meeting where we got the no vote. And he was going to put it out to bid later that week. This is 2 weeks ago. And then it was going to be 45 days that they would be able to look at that and consider bids. And then it would come back in late October to council for an up-down vote that needed a supermajority 6-3 in order to turn it into an ordinance. And then there would be a second reading 2 weeks from then. That's what we understood. But we have not heard anything public. The mayor was supposed to do a press conference last week or the week before. That never happened. We honestly just don't know if it's gone out, and we should be able to know that soon enough. But if it hasn't gone out already, it's going to be very strange, because that would mean it would come back to 45 days later, it would come back to a council that was actually a lame duck council and a lame duck mayor after November 3rd, which is would be very strange. So if it hasn't gone out yet, we're looking at the franchise expiring without any deal.
Okay, so that's the next steps with that. And so overall, but one thing that our city attorney said, Mara Elliott, said that, SDG&E is still reliable based on our city charter to continue to provide the service, even if we don't have it. So we don't make sure that no one is just feeling, want to minimize any anxiety of any of our viewers to understand that things will still go, but we want to make sure that, as you mentioned, with interest rates being low, with the capital, that, we would need a ballot measure, in order for those bonds. And so we definitely want to make sure that our public is engaged and know what the best options are for them, which is good public policy, right? So now what I want to ask is, and I'll throw this out to Wanda, Darwin, and anyone else can chime in, is we do have there is a coalition and we do form. So who do you think would be best people, as well as Rob, to really support public power? Like when you think about people in your network and just people in general in their community, who would you say should be some of the, strongest advocates for public power?
Well,
For me, go ahead, Darwin.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, because I don't know about best, but I think it's like in this standpoint of like the district I work in, like the 4th district, and for poor and working class and minority folks, it can be just taken for granted. But the truth is, it's disproportionate for us if we've got the higher bills and we have less resources. So it actually is a bigger deal for us in that sense, the deal that ultimately gets cut, or if we end up with public power, because it's in that sense, it's coming out of our wallets. And that's things that could go for things like whether it's healthcare or food. So that's real for us. And I think that's also, for me, the hat of Racial Justice Coalition and primarily working on criminal justice issues, why we jumped on board with this, because there is a real thing about self-control in our community, whether we're talking about a food desert or we're talking about the energy we have or chokehold policy. We really should have a say about the policing, about the energy in our community, and we're often the last communities that are considered, and we're not well represented. And I think this is a really golden moment for us to say, yeah, actually this is a big deal for us. We do pay these bills and we want to change.
And again, like as you mentioned before, we don't want to be the afterthought, or once the deal is already designed, then come to say, hey, we're presenting this to you saying, this is what you're going to have. We want to be at the table. So we always talk about having a seat at the table. So this is a great opportunity to pull your chair up and be part of the process. Great point. Wanda, yeah.
For me, I would say our constituents, business owners, however they look, if that's a restaurant, if that's a spa, if that's a barber, all of our businesses should join in, and primarily our seniors, because we know that our seniors have issues that run the gamut, from transportation to food to health to, if there's a Roman blackout and we're ranging 98 to 103 temperature in certain parts of the city, that can leave them in a danger zone that no one would know, especially if these seniors live alone. So for me, it's just about every constituent, business owner, get out here and help make a difference. Be a change agent. Know what that is, right? Let's create leadership development courses so people can have a better understanding. Let's continue our community engagement, because that's the only way we can get them to the table. Sometimes in the old adage that they used to do, they used to use leafers on your door. Leave a leafer on your door. So maybe we need to come up with that and start saying public power. Here we are. Come join us. Let's do a leafer.
Girl, yes, you are bringing it. I'm loving that. So, but to your point though, with our seasoned, and more elderly, they also oftentimes have equipment that they need.
Yes.
That they have to have it for their survival to actually exist.
Yes.
So I'm so glad that you brought all of our constituents, all of our residents, all of our, everyone that represents our community needs to be part of it. Yeah, great point. Anyone else want to share of who they feel like should actually be strong advocates? Go ahead, Jerry.
So I think that the way this Cody sort of outlined the process, and the end result is that these bids are going to come back and hit the city council, right? And the city council, they're going to be the ones to accept the bids or to not accept them and to say, no, let's wait. And that's kind of what we're pushing for. We want the city council to just put the stops on this for right now. So when these bids come back, they don't have to accept them. They can just say no. And then
what bid are we talking about? So, I mean, I understand.
These are the bids that the mayor is sending out, we think soon, to SDG&E and to
for the franchise agreement.
For the franchise agreement, yeah, to renew the franchise agreement for another, we think, 20 years. That's what's on the that's what the consultants that were advising the mayor suggested, that they ask for another 20-year agreement.
Now, one thing I could say that Council President Georgette Gomez, she sliced that into half. You know, it didn't move, right? But she cut that to 10 years.
But right that's the problem. We don't know. We really don't know what is in that bid package yet. So because it's been all done behind closed doors.
I'd like to make a comment, Sonja, about the fact that one of the pushes behind this effort is that consultant that was hired by the city, he thought public power was great. I mean, do it. Interest rates are low,
You're
public
right.
power, local control, lower tariffs, it's great, but I'm not going to go there. Well, we want to go there. I mean, he laid it out on a table for us and said, yes, let's do it.
You're absolutely correct. He literally said that San Diegans will benefit from a public utilities.
Right.
He also said, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
He also said, if we're going to lay out a certain set of conditions for these bidders, if the bidders balk on any condition, we default to public utility. So he set the table up so that we're just all going to step almost into public utility, but we stop right at the edge and we do something else. And so we're just taking that step.
I love it.
And so when it lands at the city council, I think this is where we have to have action. We have to have folks, your listeners, people in the community, putting pressure on their elected city council members to do the right thing.
Excellent. And Rob, can you kind of share some of your thoughts, you know, as it relates to what we've been talking about just in general, and why public power could just be a great opportunity for us? You're on mute, bro.
Yeah, it's hot here and the fans are going, so I want to make sure I didn't have any extra noise.
Right.
But no, I think the one place I would tell everyone is you've got to get the details and you have to keep people at the table. Don't wait, because typically when you're negotiating and working through things that are this complex, some stakeholders get left out. And then we're back to what Darwin was talking about earlier. Then people will prevent you from moving forward. You have to get them in early, particularly if you know they're invested in this process. And I can just tell you, like the workers, not just the bidding that you're going to be doing on poles, wires, transmission lines, the whole system. You're also, based on how the Public Utility Commission has laid out public utilities' ability to recoup rates, you also have a trained workforce. And you want to make sure that you are taking care of that. So just making sure we don't leave people outside, and pay attention to the details and be willing to lean in and know it's going to get tough, because people will fight you if you're messing with their profits. It's just going to happen.
Right. Excellent point. So we got like a minute left. Who wants to kind of bring one of the messages home? Do it like a quick popcorn. Bill, Darwin, Wanda, Danny.
Oh, I'll kick it off. You know, I wanted to mention, you know, answering that last question, you know, we really need to start looking at local and state. A lot of people are looking at national politics, and really when we're talking about the things that are impacting us the most, we're talking about local, we're talking about state, we're talking about our mayor races, our assembly races, and you know, these are really important. We really need to start looking at our city council. right now more than ever when it comes down to this franchise agreement. So I urge everyone, I'm going to make this call again, please make sure that you're contacting your city council member. It is urgent that we get through to them, that they understand that we want transparent process that plans out how we're going to get there. And right now we're just not seeing that. So, whoever wants to go next, but I really want to urge everyone to make sure that they're getting educated on this and to make sure that they're staying up to date. And again, calling your state officials, calling your city council members.
Great. Does anyone else want to make a quick? Yes, go ahead, Wanda.
I would also suggest there is a link on the city's website. They have finally decided to do a disparity study. And here's how we can make sure that we have some inclusiveness in that. The link is there. The number for the company that's doing the disparity study is there. Call them. If it ranges from employment with the city, if it ranges to your city council person, if it ranges to what Jerry was saying about this back deal and no one's seen this RFP, those are issues that can be written down in this disparity study, which can also give us another edge or a way in how we can converse with the city or whoever we need to come in contact with to make this more official. So
you are inspiring.
Anything in writing, it works.
Thank you, Wanda. You are inspiring. Bill, did you want to say a last word?
A final comment is, like Rob was saying, we got to lean in on this. We might be leaning in for a few years. This is going to take a lot of firepower. And so people have to be all in for a long haul.
Appreciate that. You guys were, just everything and more of what I expected. Thank you so much. Thank you for representing. Thank you for coming on S.U.N. We'll see you next week on S.U.N. Sustainable Urban Network.
Thank you.
Thank you.